My name is Eleanor Voss. Everyone calls me Nell. I'm 44 years old, and for 21 years I kept the paper trail for my family, every deed, every account, every signature my husband ever needed witnessed. Last spring, at 9:52 on a Wednesday night, while I was indexing a client's probate file at my kitchen table, my phone lit up with a message from Tamarindo, Costa Rica. It was from Craig, my husband. I left with your sister. Don't bother looking for us. I read it twice. Then I typed my reply and set the phone face down. Good luck. That was the whole message. My sister didn't text at all. By midnight every card was frozen, every password was changed, and a locksmith was booked for 7 the next morning. I did what I do best. I built a file and worked it in order. But here's what none of them knew. I've spent 2 decades finding people through the paper they leave behind, and paper always talks to me eventually, because the next morning, while the locksmith was still rekeying the back door, an unmarked sedan pulled into my driveway, and the question the detective asked me at my own kitchen table was one even I never saw coming. Welcome back to the channel, where quiet women tell the stories nobody saw coming, and dignity always gets the last word. If you believe a calm head beats a loud mouth, drop a comment below and subscribe. Records don't lie. People do. It took me 21 years to learn the second half of that sentence. I married Craig Dunmore when I was 23 and he was 26. He was the most charming man in Fern Hollow, Oregon, a general contractor with cedar shavings on his boots and a wave for everybody at the feed store. I was the quiet one. I worked the front desk at the county recorder's office, took evening courses, and eventually built my own probate research practice, Voss Genealogical Research, tracing missing heirs and clearing title for 3 law firms across 2 counties. People bring me shoeboxes of family paperwork every week, birth certificates, wills, deeds nobody can locate, and I have never once judged what falls out of them. For a long time we were fine. Then, 5 years ago, Craig's construction company collapsed. He'd underbid 2 commercial jobs he couldn't finish, and the debt walked in the front door right behind him. I sat him down, built a payoff schedule, and we cleared every dollar of it in under 2 years. I thought that was love. He apparently experienced it as humiliation. That's when the little jokes started. He'd introduce me at barbecues as the family archivist. He'd hold up a grocery receipt and ask, loud enough for the whole checkout line, whether this purchase had cleared committee. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, mostly. Our marriage went quiet after that, the way a house goes quiet once the furnace finally kicks off for the season, and I made the mistake of thinking quiet meant safe. I filed things, cooked on Sundays, told myself steady was its own kind of happiness. Looking back, the record was sitting right in front of me the entire time. I just hadn't been shown every page yet, and the man across the table was the one holding the rest back. People ask how I felt that first night. Honestly, I felt organized. Crying was on the list. I scheduled it for later. After the banks closed at 10, I locked down our online accounts, changed every password, rewrote every security question. My mother's maiden name got retired on the spot. I canceled both credit cards, since I was the primary account holder on each, 1 call apiece, and a very patient young man named Dimitri. The joint checking account was harder. You cannot close a joint account alone. The bank needs both signatures, a sentence I'd explained to clients dozens of times and never once expected to resent. So I did what the law allowed. I redirected my own deposits, moved my personal funds out, and asked the fraud line to flag the account for unusual activity. Then I emailed Dana Whitlock, the sharpest attorney in 3 counties and my friend since community college. Need to meet. It's urgent. Bring coffee. At 11:40, I opened the fire safe in the den to pull our documents, and that's when my hands finally went still. Craig's passport was gone, not misplaced, gone, folder sleeve and all. And the property file, the thick green folder holding everything about my grandmother's Victorian on Larkspur Street, felt light in my hands. I stood there in my robe holding a folder that weighed less than it should, and a small cold voice, the one I used during audits, said the thing I didn't want to hear. This didn't start tonight. Whatever this was, it had been running for a while, and it had been running straight through my own paperwork. To explain my sister, I have to explain the house. Kristen is 38, 6 years younger than me, and she has never once finished paying anyone back. Cosmetology school, a boutique that lasted 8 months, a candle subscription business that never shipped past month 3. I keep a folder at home labeled family, and it shows she's borrowed close to $11,000 from me over the years. I stopped expecting repayment somewhere around loan 4. Our grandmother, Agnes Voss, saw it before I did. Grandma Agnes was a widowed schoolteacher who cleaned motel rooms on weekends to keep her Victorian on Larkspur Street standing, the same house she eventually turned into a small bed and breakfast to make ends meet in her later years. For 9 years I did her books for free, drove her to every appointment, and sat with her every Sunday while she checked my arithmetic for sport. 6 years ago Kristen asked her for $18,000 to open a boutique. Grandma said no, kindly, and told her exactly why. Money follows habits, and your habits worry me, sweetheart. A year later Grandma passed at 87. She left Kristen $12,000 cash, gone within 4 months. She left me the Larkspur house and her brokerage account, with a note that read, "Check your figures twice, then sign your name like you mean it." At the first anniversary dinner for Grandma, Kristen had a little too much wine and delivered the line she'd clearly been saving all year. "You were always the ledger, Nell. Never the heart." I let it go. Sisters say things. But this past year, Kristen had turned strangely warm toward me, dropping by my office, complimenting my haircut, asking about Craig's work schedule like idle small talk. Sitting at my kitchen table that Wednesday night, I finally understood what all that warmth had actually been. It was overhead. She'd been covering expenses. At 11 that night my mother called. News travels fast once your sister posts a beach photo from a resort she can't afford. Mom was already crying before I said hello. "Nell, honey, please don't do anything rash, think of the family." I sat down slowly, because something in her voice was off, and I've spent my career listening for the figure that doesn't belong in the column. She never asked when it started. She never asked how I'd found out. She never once asked if I was certain. A mother who's just learned her son-in-law fled the country with her younger daughter asks 100 questions, and mine asked none of them. Instead she said, "Whatever happens, let's keep this inside the family. People at the co-op don't need our business." I told her I loved her and had calls to make, which was true, and hung up, which was necessary. Then I sat in my kitchen and did what I do with a suspicious invoice. I didn't accuse. I circled it and set it aside. My mother, Diane Voss, is 66, widowed 9 years, and has never once in her life been the first to know anything. That night, she wasn't surprised. I wrote a single line on my legal pad, right under the locksmith's number. "Mom, since when?" Then I switched off the kitchen light and saw 2 coffee mugs upside down in the drying rack, his and mine, set out every night for 21 years. Starting tomorrow, this house only needed one. I left them both there anyway. Even a genealogist closes some records slowly. At 8:15 the next morning, the locksmith was rekeying the back door when a Fern Hollow police cruiser rolled into my driveway, followed by an unmarked sedan. I remember thinking, absurdly, that Craig couldn't possibly have reported his own house keys stolen from Costa Rica. A woman in a charcoal blazer came up the walk, mid-50s, coffee in one hand, badge in the other. Mrs. Dunmore, Detective Alma Renner. Do you have a few minutes? It concerns a wire transfer. I poured her a cup and we sat at the same table where my marriage had ended by text 9 hours earlier. She slid a photocopy across the wood. A wire order from Cascade Trust Bank, dated the previous afternoon, moving $35,000 out of the Agnes Voss trust account, my grandmother's account, my separate inheritance, to a receiving bank in Guanacaste, Costa Rica. The bank's fraud unit had held it, a dormant trust account, a sudden 5-figure wire, a foreign destination. The system flagged it, and a human agreed. The order was signed in person at the branch, Renner said, watching my face, yesterday at 2:50 in the afternoon. Then she turned the page and tapped the signature line, and the kitchen went very still, because there was my own name, in handwriting close enough to mine to fool anyone who doesn't sign 300 documents a year. Mrs. Dunmore, can you confirm this is your signature? The locksmith's drill whined down the hallway. My cards were frozen. My locks were being changed. My husband was on a beach with my sister. And now a detective sat at my table asking me to explain a signature I'd never made on money he was still trying to steal. Here's the thing about my line of work. My whole life is time-stamped. I didn't argue with Detective Renner. I opened my laptop and pulled up my calendar. Yesterday at 2:45, I was in my office with a client of 11 years, walking her through an air search on her late uncle's estate. The appointment was confirmed by email, initialed on my intake log, and, as it happens, captured on the hardware store's camera pointed at our shared lot. Then I pulled 5 documents, tax filings, my office lease, my driver's license renewal, and laid the signatures beside the wire order. Look at the V, I said. Mine loops under and closes tight. It has since I was 10. This one drags flat. Renner set them side by side and studied them a long moment. Then she nodded, slow and thoughtful, and asked the question that rearranged my entire understanding of my own life. Mrs. Dunmore, has your husband ever signed on your behalf before? I opened my mouth to say no, and a memory arrived instead. Craig at the door in his fishing vest, years of Saturday mornings offering to drop the paperwork at the bank so I wouldn't have to make the drive. Me, grateful, him whistling on his way to the truck. Detective, I said carefully, I think you should tell me the status of that $35,000. She almost smiled. It's frozen, held pending investigation. Nothing's left the country. Then she gathered the copies and said something I've kept like a receipt ever since. Ma'am, in my experience, the person who cancels the cards first is usually not the one who's guilty. She left her card on the table. I left it face up. After the cruiser pulled away, I stood in front of our filing cabinet the way a radiologist stands in front of a scan. The Larkspur account statements should have run in one unbroken monthly line, the way I keep everything. Instead there were gaps, 3 years of them, whole seasons missing, and I don't lose paper. There was no home equity file at all, which meant nothing to me yet, except that a memory kept knocking. 19 months earlier, a courtesy notice from Cascade Trust had turned up in our mailbox referencing an account number I didn't recognize. I hadn't shrugged it off. I'd called the branch that same afternoon and asked for someone in lending. Wendell Pruitt, Craig's fishing buddy of a dozen years, came on the line warm as a July afternoon. "System glitch," he said, "a mailing error, half of Fern Hollow got one. Nothing's attached to your name." I'd asked for that in writing, because I ask for everything in writing. A week later a letter arrived on bank stationery confirming it, signed by Wendell himself. I filed it. I trusted the paper because the paper had come from inside the bank. That letter was still in my cabinet, and I set it on the kitchen table like the first card in a hand I was finally being dealt face up. Then I spread every statement I did have across the table, tax season style, and made the coffee I brew when a client is being audited. Craig hadn't just left with my sister. He'd left a paper trail behind. He forgot one thing. Paper is my native language, and I was about to read every word he'd left. I took 2 personal days, which my staff found alarming, since I hadn't taken one since a hip surgery in 2021. 48 hours, 3 pots of coffee, 1 legal pad. I called the brokerage holding Grandma Agnes's account and requested duplicate statements going back 5 years. I called Cascade Trust and did the same for anything tied to our address. Then the first quiet horror surfaced. 3 years back, the mailing address on both the Agnes Voss Trust brokerage account and on a Cascade Trust account I didn't yet recognize had been changed from my house on Larkspur Street to Post Office Box 47, Fern Hollow. I have never rented a post office box in my life. Every statement, every notice, every annual summary for 3 years had been sailing straight past me into a locked brass door at the post office, 5 blocks from my own office. That explained the gaps in my files. That explained why the courtesy notice 19 months ago was the single crumb that ever reached my mailbox, one clerical slip in an otherwise airtight detour. I sat with that a minute, because the address change form would have needed a signature, and I was starting to understand exactly whose hand had been busy pretending to be mine. The second find was smaller and worse. Going through Craig's desk drawer for the truck title, I found a folded pamphlet for Cascade Trust's mobile app with a login name penciled into the corner in his blocky handwriting. We didn't bank at Cascade Trust. We never had, not for checking, not for savings, not for anything I'd ever personally opened. The next morning, the first duplicate statement came through by email, and I printed it and watched the header roll off the printer line by line. Home equity line of credit. Property, Larkspur Street. A home equity line opened 3 years ago, secured against my grandmother's house. Credit limit $95,000, drawn to $85,000. I read it standing, then read it again sitting down. The house was mine alone, inherited property, separate property, the one thing in my life Craig's name had never once touched. To attach a loan to it, someone had to sign as Eleanor Dunmore. Someone had. I requested the full loan file, and when it arrived, there I was, page after page. Eleanor Dunmore on the application. Eleanor Dunmore on the disclosures. Eleanor Dunmore on the closing documents. Every signature dragging flat while the real one, mine, has looped tight under since I was 10 years old. At the bottom of the closing package, on the line marked loan officer, was a name I'd been saying at barbecues for a dozen years. Wendell Pruitt. Wendell, who fished with Craig every Saturday the weather allowed. Wendell, who wrote me a letter on bank stationery calling the one warning I ever received a system glitch. Wendell, who sold me a certificate of deposit at my own kitchen table the year my grandmother died and complimented my blackberry cobbler. I laid the pages out in a grid, the way I do when a client's estate documents don't line up, and let the shape of it come forward. $85,000. My grandmother scrubbed motel bathrooms for that house. He'd signed my name to it somewhere between the boat launch and lunch. I wrote Wendell's name on my legal pad and boxed it, which in my line of work isn't a doodle, it's a category. The question was no longer what Craig had taken. It was how many people had helped him take it. I called the branch the next morning and asked for Wendell Pruitt. He'd gone on sudden personal leave, I was told. Interesting timing, I said, and asked for whoever handled home equity files. I got a service representative with a voice like laminated cardboard. "Ma'am, your signature's on file, the file's fully notarized, I'm not sure what you'd like me to do." "I'd like the name of the notary." She'd have to research that and follow up. I asked when. She couldn't say. I asked for her name and read it back to her along with the exact time of the call, a habit that usually changes the temperature of a conversation. It didn't change hers. She repeated it once more, slower, as if I were slow. "The signature is on file." I thanked her and hung up before I said something unprofessional, then sat very still while the kettle screamed at me, because condescension, in my experience, files itself away as fuel. Then I did what the bank apparently hoped nobody ever would. The notary stamp sat right there on my copy of the closing package, name, commission number, expiration date. Oregon keeps a public database of notary commissions, and I looked her up while my tea went cold. The notary whose stamp had blessed my loan had left the Fern Hollow branch 2 months before the closing date printed beside her own seal. She'd relocated to Idaho. Her commission had gone inactive, which meant her stamp had stayed behind in somebody's desk drawer, and somebody had kept using it like a borrowed ghost. I circled her commission number 3 times and added a second box to my legal pad, right under Wendell's. The bank stopped being a bank that morning. It became a crime scene with a drive-through. On day 4, the texts started arriving in clusters, the way overdue bills do. Craig first. "What did you do to the cards?" Then, "This is embarrassing, Nell, fix it." Then, "Answer me." I pictured him at some open-air bar tapping his dead debit card against the counter like a man knocking on a door of a house he no longer owned. Kristen's messages came that afternoon. "The resort is threatening to call the police, is that what you want?" And then the one I've kept to this day. "Good luck." 21 years, and that's all he gets. I looked at that message a long while, my sister quoting my own goodbye back at me from a beach my grandmother's savings had paid for. And a strange calm settled over the kitchen. Yes, I thought. That's all he gets. That's precisely, exactly, to the penny, all he gets. I didn't answer any of them. I was busy. Spread across my dining table in date order were 11 duplicate withdrawal forms from Grandma Agnes's brokerage account, 3 years of them, each wearing my name in handwriting that drags where mine loops. I ran the total twice on the adding machine, because the first sum seemed impossible, and the tape agreed with itself both times. $52,000, gone in slices, quiet as carpenter ants. 85 from the house. 52 from the brokerage. And a $35,000 wire frozen midair over the Gulf of Papagayo, which would have made it 172. I sat back and looked at the tape hanging off the edge of the table, and for the first time all week I said something out loud in my empty kitchen. "You should have stopped at the boat launch, Craig. If you've ever been the one who keeps the family paperwork, the one everybody trusts to just quietly handle it, tell me in the comments, when did you learn that trust needs a paper trail?" I learned it at my own kitchen table at 2 in the morning with an adding machine and a stack of forged signatures. If this sounds familiar, hit subscribe. It gets worse before it gets better. On Sunday I drove the 20 minutes to my mother's house, the house I grew up in, and sat in her kitchen under the same cuckoo clock that has run 4 minutes fast my entire life. I put my hands flat on the table and asked her straight. "Mom, how long have you known?" She stirred her coffee a long while, then her shoulders dropped, and my mother, 66 years old, told me about Easter. 14 months earlier, after the church potluck, she'd walked out to the side lot for her casserole dish and seen Kristen sitting in Craig's truck. "Just sitting," she said, "but not the way a brother-in-law's sister sits." She'd stood behind a parked minivan holding her empty dish and watched my husband tuck my sister's hair behind her ear, and then she'd gone home and made dinner and said nothing to anyone for 14 months. "I kept praying it would burn itself out," she whispered. "I was afraid if I said it out loud it would become real." Her hands were shaking, and for one moment I saw it from inside her fear, a widow, 9 years alone, doing the terrible arithmetic of a woman who believes she can only keep the daughters who aren't fighting. It's the only tenderness I can offer her in this story, so I'm offering it here. Then the moment passed, and I stood and rinsed my cup, because tenderness and record-keeping are different departments. "You didn't keep the peace, Mom," I said from the doorway. "You kept the secret." She was crying when I left. I cried too, in the driveway, for exactly as long as the garage door took to close. Then I drove home. I had an appointment at the county recorder's office in the morning. The Wapato County Recorder's office smells like old paper and radiator heat. And I mean that as a compliment. I asked the clerk for every recorded document attached to the Larkspur Street property, and she came back with a short stack. My grandmother's deed, the transfer into my name, the home equity lien I already knew about, and one more, a durable power of attorney recorded 3 years earlier, 2 pages, notarized, in which Eleanor Dunmore grants her husband Craig Dunmore full authority over her financial affairs, accounts, property, borrowing, all of it. I read it standing at the counter while the clerk stamped somebody else's life behind me. There was my forged signature, dragging flat above the stamp of a notary who'd relocated to Idaho 2 months before the date beside her own seal. This was the skeleton key. This was how one man had walked into banks for 3 years wearing my name like a borrowed coat. Any teller who blinked twice at the paperwork could be shown this document. See, right here, the wife signed it all over to him, notarized and everything. Every forgery after this one hadn't even been risky. It had been furniture. And in the bottom corner of the second page, faint but unmistakable, ran a line of small print I recognized because I've filed 1,000 pages carrying it, an internal document code, the kind Cascade Trust's own branch systems print on paperwork generated in-house. This thing hadn't been printed off some template at midnight. It had been drafted inside that branch, on their system, on their printer. I paid for 2 certified copies, and my hands were steady, which surprised even me. He hadn't just stolen my money. He'd stolen my consent, and somebody inside that bank had helped him laminate it. I put the copies in my bag between 2 sheets of cardboard, like evidence, because that's exactly what they were. Dana Whitlock has practiced law in this county for 28 years, wears her reading glasses on a beaded chain, and does not say wow lightly. She read the power of attorney in her office with her sandwich forgotten in its wrapper, and when she finally looked up, she took the glasses all the way off. "Nell, this is felony forgery. The dollar figure pushes it into first-degree theft, and the house is separate property. Inherited assets don't belong to the marriage, which means this isn't a messy divorce." This is a crime with a divorce attached. Then she built the machine the way good lawyers do, in numbered steps, while I took notes. 1. A forensic document examiner, court qualified, and I'd hand over 10 years of known signatures, tax filings, license renewals, client engagement letters, so the examiner could put science under what my eyes already knew. 2. A formal complaint to Detective Renner, the complete package, organized the way I organize everything, so the district attorney would never have an excuse to call it complicated. 3. Silence. Don't tip him off, Dana said. No angry texts, no lawyer letters to Costa Rica. Let him sit on that beach wondering why the money's frozen. Men like Craig make their worst mistakes while they're waiting. 4. The divorce filing prepared now, submitted alongside everything else. She also settled one thing that had been itching at me, the locks. The Larkspur house was mine alone, and there was no restraining order in place. Changing my own locks was fully legal. You did it right, she said. Keep doing it right. I told her the truth. I don't want revenge, Dana. I want the record corrected under oath. She smiled and picked her sandwich back up. Same thing, honey, done properly. The next 10 days were paperwork, and I have never enjoyed paperwork more. The brokerage froze Grandma Agnes's trust account on a victim of fraud affidavit, every remaining dollar locked down. The $35,000 wire was formally canceled, and the funds settled back where they belonged, like a dog finding its way home. Cascade Trust received a letter from me, which I was allowed to review before it went out, and it used the phrase facilitated by your own personnel in a way that made me pour a second cup of coffee just to enjoy it properly. The bank's reply came within 4 business days. An internal investigation was now open. Meanwhile, somewhere in Guanacaste, the ecosystem was collapsing. Craig's texts changed register like a man missing a stair. Nell, be reasonable, release the accounts and I'll sign whatever you want. Then, the resort moved us to a smaller room. Are you happy now? Then, and I had to read this one twice, I need to come home and sort this out, we'll talk like adults. The man who'd written "Don't bother looking for us" now needed someone to find him. He thought this was still a marital spat, that the freeze was me sulking with the only tools I had, a wife's tantrum in spreadsheet form, and that once he got some sun and I got lonely, the accounts would thaw. He had no idea there was a detective, an examiner, and a district attorney standing between him and every dollar he'd ever pretended was his. I never answered. On the 10th day my phone rang. Detective Renner, and her voice had news in it. Mrs. Dunmore, you might want to sit down. We found where the $52,000 went. I did not sit down. I stood at my kitchen window with the phone against my ear while she walked me through it, bank by bank, form by form. The withdrawals from my grandmother's brokerage split into 2 distinct eras, like layers in a road cut. The first era, starting 3 years back, went to Craig, cash, debts, the lingering rot of his failed construction company. But the second era was different. Over the last 16 months, 7 of those 11 withdrawals, $29,000 worth, had landed in an account at a credit union 2 towns over. The account holder was Eleanor Voss. The memo lines read things like consulting fees and home repairs. My sister has never consulted on anything besides a wine list. The plane tickets to Costa Rica, Renner added, were purchased with a draw from the home equity line. My grandmother's house had bought their boarding passes. I watched a scrub jay land on the feeder outside my window and thought about Kristen at my office last spring, sweet as pie, asking about Craig's schedule. My sister hadn't just fallen into something with my husband. She'd been on the payroll for over a year. My grandmother's motel cleaning money had been direct deposited straight into the affair, and Kristen had cashed every installment while borrowing my scarves for the co-op meetings. Renner let the silence sit, then said the careful part. With this structure, your sister's looking at receiving stolen property, possibly worse. The DA will want to know if you're prepared for that. On my refrigerator hung a photo from 3 Christmases back, Mom, Kristen, me, matching aprons, flour everywhere. I looked at it while I answered. Detective, I said, I clear titles on estates for a living. I'm prepared for everything. Here's the question I want you to sit with. If it were your own sister's name on that account, your own blood, would you still press charges? Put your answer in the comments. I read every one, and subscribe if you want to hear what I chose, because my mother begged me to pick the other door, and there was a moment, one long Sunday night, when I very nearly did. 2 weeks later, Cascade Trust invited us into a conference room with bottled water and a long table, which is what banks do instead of apologizing. Branch Vice President, Bank Counsel, Dana, me. I brought the binder, built the way I build an estate file, tabbed, indexed, chronological, and I walked them through it in the voice I use for closing meetings, no adjectives in it at all. Tab 1, the power of attorney, with the state notary database printout showing the commission inactive 2 months before the date on the stamp. Tab 2, the home equity application and closing package, $85,000 drawn. Tab 3, 11 withdrawal forms. Tab 4, the post office box rental record, opened with Craig's own debit card, because arrogance is its own filing error. Tab 5, Wendell Pruitt's letter on bank stationery calling the only warning I ever received a system glitch. Bank counsel stopped taking notes at Tab 3. At Tab 5, he asked for a 5-minute recess and came back with a second lawyer. Then they brought in Wendell. He'd lost weight since the last barbecue, and he sat like a man whose chair was slowly heating up beneath him. He didn't look at me once. Everything went through standard process, he told the table. Ask Craig, this was his family's business. His family's business. My house, my trust, my forged, yes, his family's business. Nobody in that room believed him, including the man who signed his paychecks, and everyone could feel it. The vice president cleared his throat and suggested they pause pending consultation with legal. Dana capped her pen like a period at the end of a sentence. Outside in the parking lot, she finally said it. Wow. The examiner's report came back in 2 weeks, and it read like poetry to me, 36 pages of it. 28 signatures spanning 3 years, all classified as simulated, traced, or practiced imitations written by someone else's hand. The report mapped it stroke by stroke, pen lifts where I make none, a flat dragging V where mine loops under and closes tight since I was 10, hesitation marks invisible to the eye and obvious under magnification. Forgery isn't a talent, it turns out, it's a habit, and habits leave fingerprints. The bank's internal investigation landed the same week, and Cascade Trust did what institutions do when the building's on fire, it saved itself. The branch's notary log showed entries squeezed in after the fact, in ink that didn't match the surrounding pages. Wendell Pruitt was suspended, then terminated, then reported to state regulators by his own employer, in that exact order. Within 9 days the bank voided the lien on my house and quietly absorbed the loss on the equity line, because their own lawyer could read tab 5 just as well as mine could. And then Wendell, facing charges of his own, did the one reliable thing he'd managed in 3 years. He called the district attorney and offered everything. How Craig had brought him a stack of pre-signed documents. How the power of attorney had been drafted in the branch after hours, on the bank's own template. How the retired notary's stamp had lived in a drawer. How that final $35,000 wire got logged as an in-person authorization by me while Craig waited in the branch parking lot. And how each step had seemed just one small favor bigger than the last one. The first rule of fraud is the same as dominoes. It only ever takes one man trying to save himself. Dana called with the news that charges against Craig were being drafted. "He'll hear about it soon," she said. "Where is he now?" I checked my phone. "Running out of money," I said. It took 3 weeks total for Paradise to foreclose. The resort evicted them once the bill went unpaid. Kristen's own card maxed out on the deposit at a cheaper place down the coast. And on a Thursday evening in June, a rideshare I did not pay for stopped in front of my house, and Craig Dunmore walked up his former driveway with a duffel bag and a sunburn. I watched from the front window as he tried his key, tried it again, then stared at the new brass deadbolt like it had personally betrayed him. Then the knocking started, then the pounding. I opened the door to the width of the chain. Up close he looked older, and the charm switched on like a porch light with a dying bulb. "Honey, okay, this got out of hand, let me in, we'll untangle it together, you're good at that." I said nothing, which in 21 years has never once failed to make Craig talk more. The charm burned off inside a minute. "You froze my money, Nell. You embarrassed me in front of, do you have any idea what you've done? You'll regret making this public." Across the street the Osgoods porch light came on, then the Merricks. Fern Hollow watches out for its own. I looked at my husband through the gap the chain allowed and gave him the only sentence I'd prepared. "You said don't bother looking for you. It's the only promise you kept for 3 weeks." Then I closed the door, and the deadbolt made its good news sound. Through the window I watched the patrol car turn onto Larkspur right on schedule, because Detective Renner had told me warrants don't care about sunburns. Craig was arrested on the driveway he used to seal every spring. Kristen found me 4 days later in the parking lot of Fern Market, between my car and the cart return, because ambushes run in the family now. Her tan was peeling, and her voice was already halfway to breaking. "You have to call this off. Craig's mother won't even look at me. Do you understand? They arrested him in the street like a criminal." I loaded my groceries 1 bag at a time and let her talk, because I'd waited 38 years to hear my sister say what she actually believed, and she did not disappoint. "Grandma's money should have been half mine, Nell. Half. You did her books for 9 years so she'd cut me out. Don't pretend that was love, that was strategy. Craig just took back what this family owed me." There it was, the whole ledger of her, laid out between the shopping carts. She hadn't stolen anything in her own mind. She'd simply been collecting a debt, and my husband had been the teller who processed it. A woman with a toddler hurried past and pretended not to listen. Kristen stepped closer, her voice dropping into the old groove from Grandma's anniversary dinner. "You were always the ledger, Nell, never the heart." I closed the trunk. I looked at my little sister, the peeling tan, the trembling chin, the credit union account still carrying $29,000 of a dead woman's motel money moving in and out of it, and I finally answered that line, 5 years late. "The ledger is why you're not in jail yet." Her face went uncertain, because she didn't yet know about the charges being weighed against her, and I wasn't the one who was going to tell her. I got in my car. In the mirror, my sister looked very small, and for the first time in our lives, correctly sized. My mother came to my house on a Sunday evening in her church clothes, carrying a Marionberry pie like a peace treaty. I made her coffee, because she's my mother and this is Oregon. Then she set her cup down and made her request. Drop the part about Kristen, whatever they're deciding, tell them you don't want it. Craig, fine, let him answer for it, but she's your sister, Nell, your blood, the whole co-op is talking, your father, rest him, would want this family whole. I let the clock run a while, and I'll be honest with you, the way I promised at the start. There was a long moment at that table when I almost said yes, not for Kristen, for my mother's hands around that coffee cup, and for the version of this family that existed back when the aprons matched. Then I remembered whose money had bought the plane tickets, and whose name had been borrowed to do it, and I found my footing. Mom, it isn't mine to drop, the prosecutor decides now, not me, and I won't ask him to go easy, because here's what I've learned this year. She looked up. You protected the family name for 14 months, I said gently, because gentle and firm can share a sentence. I'm going to protect the family truth. Those are different jobs, and somebody in this family finally has to do the second one. She cried a little, and I let her. I still wrapped up half the pie for her to take home, because boundaries are walls with doors in them, not moats. At the door she asked what happens next. A trial, Mom, I said. And you should come. The truth does better with family in the room. Craig made bail. His mother in Salem put up her certificate of deposit, which is its own particular kind of heartbreak. The county offered him a plea within the month, admit the forgery, accept restitution of $137,000, serve 16 months. Any man with a working calculator takes that deal. Craig turned it down. Dana heard the reasoning through the courthouse grapevine, which in this county moves faster than email, and relayed it to me over lunch with one eyebrow already raised. He told his lawyer, quote, Nell hates a scene, she'll settle quiet before she ever takes the stand. I stirred my soup and considered the strange comfort of being underestimated by the same man in the same way for 21 straight years. He'd built his entire defense on a wife he'd invented, the bookkeeper in the background who'd rather eat glass than raise her voice in public. His attorney, a polished man from Portland, had a theory to match. I was the controlling one, the woman who managed every dollar in that house, so obviously I'd known about the loans, approved them even, and had only cried forgery once the marriage collapsed. They chose a bench trial, betting a judge would find money disputes tedious, and they planned to paint my carefulness as control and my silence as consent. Dana asked if I understood what cross-examination would try to do to me. I told her I've walked clients through IRS audits with receipts stored in a tackle box. He's betting everything on one thing, Dana said. That you won't stand up in front of this whole county and say it out loud. Will you? I finished my soup. Book the whole front row, I said. The evening before trial, I drove the half-hour up to Larkspur Street alone. The lien was off the house by then, the bank had seen to that with impressive speed once its own paperwork turned radioactive, but liens come off titles faster than they come off people. I sat on the wraparound porch and let the boards creak under me the way they always have. Inside, the house smelled like cedar in 1962. Grandma Agnes's reading chair still faced the garden. Her measuring cups still hung in size order, because she was that kind of woman, and apparently so am I. I sat in her chair with my testimony binder on my knees and went through it one last time, tabs in color order, the timeline down to the minute, 28 forged signatures each matched against a true one, side by side, like before and after photographs of my own name. Somewhere out back a screech owl called, and I thought about my grandmother's hands, the ones that scrubbed motel bathrooms at 5 in the morning so nobody could ever take this porch away from her family. Check your figures twice, she used to say, licking her thumb to turn my homework pages. Then sign your name like you mean it. They'd taken her savings, her house's clean title, and the sound of my own name on a signature line, and spent it on swim-up bars. The figures had been checked twice, 3 times, by me, by an examiner, by the state of Oregon. All that remained was the signing. I opened the binder's front cover and wrote my name across the inside page, the real signature, the V looping tight under. Tomorrow the whole county would learn the difference. The Wapato County Courthouse is 90 years old, and Courtroom 2 has a radiator that ticks like it's being paid by the hour. By 9 that morning the benches were full. My longtime client Ruth Okonkwo sat in the second row with 3 others flanking her like a church committee. My mother sat in the third row in her navy funeral dress, purse held with both hands. A reporter from the Fern Hollow Sentinel claimed the aisle seat, pencil already moving. This county doesn't get many trials where the evidence has a garden view. Craig sat at the defense table in a suit I'd bought him for a cousin's wedding, freshly barbered, and when I walked in he tried the old smile on me, the barbecue smile, and I watched it die of natural causes halfway across the room. The district attorney, a methodical man named Ferris whom I'd come to respect, opened by setting a single enlarged document on the wooden exhibit stand, which creaked. The power of attorney. He let it sit in silence a moment in front of the judge, the way you display something venomous in a jar. Then came Wendell Pruitt, who'd taken his plea and now belonged to the state. He testified in a voice like wet cardboard, the after-hours drafting session on the bank's own template, the stamp of a notary 2 months gone to Idaho sitting in a drawer, the log entries added later in ink that didn't match. Small favors, he kept repeating, while the radiator ticked and Craig stared at the table. It started with small favors. On cross, Craig's polished Portland attorney went exactly where we knew he'd go. Isn't it true that Mrs. Dunmore controlled every dollar in that household, that nothing moved without her approval? He said my name like an accusation, and I sat straight in the front row and let it land on me and slide off. Ferris stood back up. Your Honor, the state calls Eleanor Dunmore. I've walked clients through audits for close to 15 years, and my advice never changes. Answer the question asked, bring your paper, let the numbers carry the emotion. On the stand, I finally took my own advice in public. Ferris walked me through the binder 1 tab at a time, and I kept every answer short and level, the closing table voice, and the courtroom got quieter with every exhibit. Exhibit 11, a withdrawal form, April, 2 years prior, $3,600. The signature drags flat. Mine loops tight under. It has since I was 10. Page after page, the same sentence built up like brick. The wire order signed at a teller window at 2:50 on an afternoon when I was in my office with a client whose confirmation email, intake log, and the hardware store's own parking lot camera all agreed on exactly where I'd been standing. The equity closing attended in person by me on a day I was actually at a professional conference in Eugene, my badge scan, my hotel folio, and a continuing education certificate, all filed under tab 8, because the one useful thing about my life is that it arrives with receipts. Then the polished attorney rose for cross, buttoned his jacket, and smiled at me the way men smile right before they explain your own household back to you. Mrs. Dunmore, you ran every dollar in that home, you reconcile records for a living, and you'd have this court believe $85,000 moved past you and you simply missed it. The radiator ticked twice while I looked at him. I didn't miss the figures, counselor. The figures were hidden from me. There's a difference, and it's a felony. Somebody in the back row turned a laugh into a cough. The judge wrote something down. The attorney checked his legal pad, tried the mailing angle, and I explained the post office box rented on my husband's own debit card, into which 3 years of my financial life had been quietly rerouted 5 blocks from my own office. He tried the courtesy notice angle, and I read Wendell Pruitt's system glitch letter aloud, on bank stationery, dated and signed. Then he asked for a moment to confer, and Craig, I watched it happen, shook off his lawyer's hand and stood up. Against the advice of counsel, a phrase that will now follow him for the rest of his life. Craig took the stand after lunch. He wanted the county to hear his side, and the county heard it. He started calm, hands folded, telling the judge about a man who'd built houses with his back while his wife built walls with her spreadsheets. 2 minutes in, the folded hands came apart. 5 minutes in, his voice began to climb, and I recognized the sound from 21 years of kitchen table skirmishes, the sound of Craig realizing the room wasn't agreeing with him. 21 years on an allowance, he said, and the word allowance came out splintered. Her money, her rules, her grandmother's precious house sitting up there on that street. The judge tapped the gavel once. Craig leaned into the microphone. I built that life. She kept the keys. You want to talk about criminal? The gavel came down harder, and his own attorney had a hand over his eyes now. And still Craig climbed, because the man never once in his life slowed down for a yellow light. So yes, I signed her name. Somebody in that marriage had to act like a man. The room went completely silent except for the radiator. His lawyer sat down slowly, the way you sit when the verdict has already testified. And then Craig turned in the witness chair, found my face in the front row, and pointed straight at me across courtroom 2. Say something, he shouted, in front of the judge, the sentinel, my mother, and God. For once in your life, feel something. I looked back at him and gave him exactly what I'd given him from my kitchen table at 9:52 on a Wednesday night. Silence and a level face. I did not move. The radiator ticked. The court reporter's keys clicked like an adding machine, entering it all into the permanent record. And I remember thinking that after 21 years, Craig Dunmore had finally told the whole truth in public, under oath, at full volume. The quietest person in the room had gotten the loudest man in the county to confess. All I had to do was nothing. The judge didn't need long. Guilty on the forgery counts, felony. Guilty on first-degree theft. Restitution set at $137,000, $85,000 from the house lien, $52,000 from my grandmother's brokerage, the frozen wire having already found its way home. 28 months, with a portion suspended contingent on restitution and full cooperation with the bank's regulators. The courtroom took it quietly. My mother made one small sound behind me, a mother's sound, and I don't fault her for it. There was cleanup after, the kind that never makes headlines but balances the ledger anyway. Wendell Pruitt, by his plea, got probation, a fraud conviction of his own, and a lifetime ban from banking issued by the state regulators. The man who notarized ghosts will spend the rest of his working life asking customers if they want the extended warranty. Cascade Trust settled with me quietly and fully, and my house's title today is as clean as its windows. Kristen pleaded to receiving stolen property, a misdemeanor, by grace of her cooperation and a restitution schedule and 200 hours of community service. She avoided jail, and I'm told that was partly because the paper trail I'd built made it easy for the DA to be precise about exactly what she'd taken, and precision. Turns out to be Mercy's best friend. The divorce, with a fraud finding attached, went the way fraud findings go. The man walked out of my life with his truck, his clothes, and a payment book. But the detail I keep, the one I'd frame if you could frame such things, came at the very end of the hearing, when they brought Craig the paperwork acknowledging the judgment. He took the pen, and his hand shook so badly he had to steady it with his other one, and I watched my husband struggle, for the first time in 3 years, to produce a signature, his own. The first honest name that man had signed since the boat launch, and it barely held its shape. Mine, in the front row, sat perfectly steady in my lap. The bailiff gathered his things. They walked him up the center aisle, past the front row, toward the doors, and gave him one last moment at my shoulder. The bailiff allowed it, one beat of grace. Up close, the sunburn had faded, and the barbecue charm was gone, and what was left was just a man in a borrowed-looking suit with cuffed hands, looking at the woman who'd kept his books, his house, and his secrets running for 21 years without ever once being thanked for any of the bookkeeping. "Nell," he said, quiet now, the courtroom voice all used up. "Please tell them who I was for 21 years. I looked up at him the way I look at a reconciled account, no anger left in it, no love either, every line explained, nothing outstanding. And I gave him back the only reply this whole story ever required, the one I'd typed at my kitchen table with a probate file still open beside my phone. Good luck." His face did something complicated, and the bailiff moved him along, and the doors at the back of courtroom 2 swung shut behind my husband with a sound like a drawer closing. Down the hall, Kristen stood against the wall by the water fountain and didn't come near me. My mother wept quietly into her handkerchief in the row behind. And Ruth Okonkwo, 11 years my client and better than family that particular day, squeezed my elbow with her small jeweled hand and said, "Your grandmother would have signed her own name to this day, honey. Twice, if they'd let her." The divorce was final 6 weeks later, and the restitution comes out of Craig's wages every month like weather. I don't watch for it anymore, but Dana's office tells me it has never once been late, because the alternative is spelled out on the judgment in plain English. Kristen moved to Arizona before the leaves turned. She sent me one letter, 4 pages, and I read every word of it on the porch with coffee, because whatever else is true, she's my sister, and I wanted to know. There was an apology in it, and around the apology, doing most of the actual talking, were the same old arithmetic errors. Half of Grandma's money should have been hers. Everyone had always underestimated what she'd been through. I didn't write back. Her restitution payments arrive on schedule, and I've decided that's her real letter. It's the first thing she's ever paid back in her life, and I intend to let her finish it. My mother and I have found our new arrangement. She calls on Sundays. She comes for coffee once a month, and we talk about her knees and her dahlias, and sometimes, carefully, about everything else. The first time she started a sentence with "If you'd just kept it private," I said "Mom" in the closing table voice, and she stopped, and hasn't started that sentence again since. Keeping the peace is no longer this family's policy. We keep the truth now. It turns out the truth also comes with pie, just less often. The house on Larkspur Street is mine, clean on every line of the title, and I run it as a small bed and breakfast most weekends, doing my own week's paperwork in Grandma Agnes's chair with the window open to the garden. Her measuring cups still hang in size order. So do mine now, at home, and I've stopped minding the teasing about it. My little office off Main Street has never been busier, though the appointments have changed shape. Women come in, farm wives, retired teachers, widows, one reference librarian who drove in from 2 counties over, and they set papers on my desk the way you set down something heavy, and they say some version of the same sentence. "Nell, can you look at what my husband asked me to sign?" I always look. That part is always free. Some of the papers are fine, most of them, honestly. And I get to watch a woman's Shoulders come down from around her ears, which has become my favorite part of this profession. And a few of the papers are not fine, and those women get the other speech, the one that starts with "you're not crazy and you're not foolish," and ends with Dana Whitlock's phone number tucked into their coat pocket. The new rule in my house, and I'd carve it over the door if the Historical Society would allow it, is simple. Nobody signs for anybody in this family. Not for convenience, not for kindness, not for love. Love, it turns out, was never the problem. Love doesn't need your signature. It needs your eyes open, your statements arriving where you actually live, and your name in your own handwriting, the V looping tight under on every single thing you agree to, and on nothing, ever, that you don't. I spent 21 years believing love meant handling everything quietly. But the day I learned the difference between keeping the peace and keeping the truth, I stopped lending my name to other people's lies. And my signature, the real one, turned out to be the only inheritance my grandmother actually left me. That's my story. One text from Costa Rica, one short reply, and 28 forged signatures that finally landed on the right name. If this reminded you to pull your own statements, or to ask exactly what your signature is attached to, take that as a sign, do it this week. If you know a woman who needs to hear this, share it with her. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.